spoken now. The clock's run out, time's up, over, plow, snap back to reality. Oh, there goes gravity, oh, there goes gravity, choke, he's so mad.
This is the man that is running for president of the United States, and he is gaining a ton of attention. But it's not for his rapping skills.
Vivek Ramaswamy. Vivek Ramaswamy.
Vivek Ramaswamy.
Vivek Ramaswamy was, and he joins us now.
Vivek Ramaswamy. The man is only 38 years old, which would make him the youngest president in US history, and he has seemingly come out of nowhere. Just 6 months ago, nobody even knew who this guy was. And I have to admit, every single clip of him that pops up on Twitter, I can't help but watch.
Mary is this. Do you want a super PAC puppet, or do you want a patriot who speaks the truth? Now that everybody's gotten their memorized, pre-prepared slogans out of the way, we can actually have a real discussion now.
But who actually is Vivek? I'm Canadian, but I have to admit, I'm obsessed with US politics, and I'm obsessed with making money. And it turns out that is something that Vivek has made a ton of. But who actually is he? How did he make his money? How much money does he have? And is he actually somebody that we should be paying attention to as the 2024 election comes up? And of course, for all of you watching that are interested in making money, what is it that we can learn from how Vivek made his fortune? Well, I spent 3 entire days researching all of these questions, and some of the answers might surprise you.
In 4 years, we will realize that tonight is not the destination of those travels, but is instead only another stop on that journey. So tonight, let that journey begin. Actually, excuse me. It's already begun. Thank you all, and may God bless.
Okay, let's cut right to the chase. How much money does Vivek actually have, and what kind of factor does it play in him running for president? Well, let's first look at the top GOP nominees so we can have some kind of context. Chunky Chris Christie is worth an estimated $19 million. That's a lot more than Mike Pence, whose net worth is estimated to be $4 million. And Ron Desantis, who is one of the most popular GOP nominees currently, is sitting at just over the $1 million mark, which I guess makes sense because he is younger than the other guys. So what about Vivek? Well, according to his campaign manager, he is worth $1 billion. Billion with a B. According to Forbes, he's worth around $950 million. Give or take a $50 million, I don't think it really matters. The man is a billionaire. To put that into perspective, that is far more than anybody else standing up on that stage, except for, of course, Donald Trump. In fact, it's actually less than half of Trump's reported net worth, which is around $2.5 billion. But at this point, who cares? It's a ton of money either way. But the question is, does any of this actually matter? Does how much money a potential presidential candidate have matter when it comes to whether or not you're going to vote for them? Well, in my opinion, and also in Vivek's and Trump's opinion, it makes a massive difference. The reason it does is because it means that these candidates don't have to accept large donations from companies, and that means that they don't just quickly become puppets that are saying things that others want them to say. And that is the exact point that Vivek made during the first presidential debate, absolutely roasting everybody on stage.
Yeah, Mike, I just want to respond to Mike for 1 second because he invoked me back. Listen, now that everybody's gotten their memorized, pre-prepared slogans out of the way, we can actually have a real discussion now. The reality and the fact of the matter is...
Was that one of yours?
Not really, Mike, actually. We're just going to have some fun tonight. And the reality is, you have a bunch of people, professional politicians, super PAC puppets, following slogans handed over to them by their 400-page super PACs last week. The real choice we face in this primary is this. Do you want a super PAC puppet, or do you want a patriot who speaks the truth? Do you want incremental reform, which is what you're hearing about, or do you want revolution?
Okay.
And I stand on the side of the American Revolution.
And this is really where the power of Vivek's money comes in. Vivek, like Trump, is funding his own campaign along with donations from individuals. That means he is not a puppet of super PACs. I mean, just take a look at this clip where there was an insane leak from Ron DeSantis' super PAC, a company that is funding him, and they specifically sent him a document that said exactly what he needs to say about Vivek during the first presidential debate, and it's just absolutely nuts.
As the documents have a pretty hilarious suggestion on how Ron DeSantis should do that. So it says, take a sledgehammer to Vivek Ramaswamy, fake Vivek or Vivek the fake. People get paid for this? Jake, what are we doing with our careers? They're like, people make money to give this advice.
And right there is where the power of having money and being an outsider comes in. But at this point, like I said, I like making money. The question is, how did Vivek actually make his money? Because if you're anything like me, you didn't even hear about this guy 6 months ago. So what's his actual story?
I had a question.
Yeah, absolutely. What's your name?
Josh. So I'm trying to be successful myself, you know, and I was just wondering if I could get some advice.
How old are you?
16.
16. So the way I achieved success, follow a simple formula. Find where the pack is going and then figure out what they missed. So in order to be successful, I think you have to buck the consensus and you have to be right. If you do those two things, sky's the limit for what you can achieve. Remember that though, because if everybody else is doing it and you're right, there's no special opportunity for you. If you do something else that no one else is doing but you're wrong, there's no winner. You have to buck the consensus, you have to be contrarian, and you have to be right. You find that, no limit to what you achieve. That's what American capitalism rewards.
I recently stumbled across this great clip on Instagram where a 15-year-old was asking Vivek if he had any advice for him on how to be successful. Find out where the pack is going and figure out what they missed. The thing about Vivek is that he literally came out of nowhere. 6 months ago, I had never heard of him, and I don't think most people had. The only reason I stumbled across him was I was listening to a podcast, I fell asleep, took a nap, and slept long enough that by the time I woke up, Spotify had put on a brand new podcast, and it was this guy Vivek. I had no idea who he was, but just the way that he was talking, his charisma, his confidence quickly grabbed my attention. I kept listening and I looked him up. Somehow or another, I knew that he was rich, but I had no idea how he actually made his money. And you don't see him talk about it a lot on the campaign trail. So if you're anything like me, you're probably wondering how he did make his money. And I have to admit, after doing the research for 3 days, it was pretty boring, but I actually found a few juicy and interesting parts of his story that are worth knowing and paying attention to. And it turns out that the advice that he gave to that 15-year-old kid is actually the exact advice that made him successful and made him a billionaire.
Speak directly to it then. Okay. I actually think the potential opportunity here is really tremendous for delivering value to patients. There's over 5 million patients who suffer from Alzheimer's disease in this country alone. And if you think about it, we own global rights to a drug that has already demonstrated in a large phase 2B study efficacy on the 2 parameters that the FDA has historically required for new Alzheimer's disease drugs. And actually, we believe we're only one additional phase 3 study away from the approval of this drug.
That was Vivek 8 years ago talking about a company that he founded, Axovant Sciences, a company that he raised $360 million for in 2015 to help market a drug for Alzheimer's. The actual story though is pretty juicy. In 2014, Vivek bought the rights to a drug for only $5 million, which in the pharmaceutical industry is absolute pennies. A year later, he appeared in Forbes and said his company would be the highest return on investment endeavor ever taken up in the pharmaceutical industry. Big words, but this is nothing surprising considering that this is a guy who would go on 8 years later to run for president and is very good at obviously hyping himself up. Fast forward a little bit, even before clinical trials for this drug began, Vivek managed to launch an IPO for Axovant and Wall Street just massively ate it up. Whether it was Vivek's charm and charisma that was able to convince investors, or people genuinely thought that there was a lot of potential for this drug in treating Alzheimer's, who knows? But on IPO day, the company raised $315 million, and overnight, the company became worth an insane $3 billion. But do you know what's even more insane than launching an IPO, raising over $300 million before any clinical trials came out? It's that the company became worth $3 billion and they only had 8 employees. And on top of that, one of the employees was Vivek's mom, and the other was his brother. And of course, at this time, Vivek absolutely cleaned up. In 2015, he claimed $37 million in capital gains, and he sold a large portion of his company to a hedge fund, making even more money. At the time, everything was going amazing. Everything was looking good. Vivek would go on to say that his company would be the Berkshire Hathaway of pharmaceutical companies. And as we saw when he went on Jim Cramer, this drug was hopefully going to help millions of patients with Alzheimer's. The thing is though, it turned out to be a massive failure. 2 years later, in 2017, the company announced that its large clinical trial had failed. The company's stock plummeted, losing 75% in a single day, and eventually abandoning the drug altogether. But as for Vivek, don't worry, he was pretty much completely insulated from the losses, having already sold a large portion of his holdings. Axovant would try and reinvent itself as a gene therapy company, but in 2023, it eventually shut down. But for Vivek, he cleaned up. It wasn't necessarily a failure. You see, Axovant was only one of his companies. It was a subsidiary of Roivant Sciences, a company that acts as an umbrella that invests in a whole bunch of other pharmaceutical companies, drug development, and so on and so forth. The whole point of Roivant Sciences is to purchase the patents for drugs that are underdeveloped and then see if there's a way that a company overlooked them, that they could market them in a different way or find a new usage for them to help patients. In other words, Vivek buys drugs for cheap and he tries to use them in ways that other companies didn't think of. Find where the pack is going and figure out what they missed. He doesn't just spew out things that he himself doesn't follow, and in that regard, Vivek is very refreshing. He did something incredibly simple. He found the direction that the pack was going, and he found something that they overlooked, and as a result, he made hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. His company, Roivant, received an investment of $1.1 billion by SoftBank in 2017, and 2 years later, Vivek made $175 million when 5 subsidiaries were sold off. Of course, at the end of the day, you have to respect a guy who puts his money where his mouth is, who does what he says he believes. With massive amounts of cash in his pockets in 2021, he stepped down as CEO, and in 2023, he stepped down as chair to run for president of the United States. Speaking of president, at this point you might be wondering, why wouldn't he just ride off into the sunset? A cool $1 billion in his pockets, a family, a wife, kids. Why wouldn't he just retire and maybe focus on something else other than becoming the next president?
Why do you want to be the next president of the United States?
I am worried, Margaret, that we are in the middle of this national identity crisis where my generation in particular, our generation, we're hungry for purpose and meaning and identity. And yet we hunger to be part of something bigger than ourselves, yet we can't even answer what it means to be an American. I think that loss of identity is responsible for a lot of our economic stagnation. It's part of what's actually even behind the loss of our fortitude on the global stage. And I think that I actually have a vision of what it means to be a citizen of this country because I have lived the true American dream. And I am worried that will not exist for the next generation unless we do something about it.
I have to admit, I am a sucker for charisma and confidence. When somebody like Vivek or Vivek himself talks, I just pay attention to. He's just magnetic. But it's rare that we find somebody like that who actually can back up that confidence and charisma with content and substance. I mean, there were tons of people in my high school that were popular, that had charisma, that had confidence, but now they're 25 and they're still working a minimum wage job because they had nothing to back that up with. But it looks like Vivek actually might be able to back up his confidence with substance. He has a track record, at least in business, and undoubtedly he has some very interesting ideas. For example, his opening statement during the first presidential debate, during the first GOP debate, he spoke about his 10 truths, which is his pinned tweet on Twitter, and it grabbed a ton of attention. But listen, we all know that Trump is the #1 candidate, the most popular candidate for the presidential nomination in 2024. He's so ahead in the polls, but remember, Vivek is smart. He of course is not oblivious to this. When someone on stage was asked if they would support Trump as the nominee, Vivek was the first one to raise his hand. He's being incredibly methodical in how he's approaching all of this. He's not trying to burn any bridges. Even take a look at this clip where he is asked about Trump and just how he responds.
I am not running from something. I am leading us to a vision of what it means to be an American. and doing it while authentically respecting what Trump did for this country. But drawing a contrast, I mean, the contrasts are plenty. I'm less than half his age. I am the fresh outsider in this race. I have a clear, detailed vision to take on policy disputes, policy objectives that he was even unwilling to touch. So those are details, but I think they're important details. But most importantly, I think respecting his legacy and doing it authentically will allow me to be more successful in winning this nomination.
So considering just how strong the MAGA movement is and how much support Trump has, perhaps he won't be the next president in 2024. But a billionaire president and a billionaire vice president, now that might be something that's interesting. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Until then, peace.